So this month on August's PC of the Month, we have a $242 build featuring a new case and something that performs similar to a new build with a 1050 Ti. I know, crazy, right? And I've even put a GPU backplate on my GPU, so I'll put the template here for you guys. You can download it, 3D print it, but let's take a look at how this thing performs. So you may be in the market for a new PC. You might even be interested in spending $500 plus and getting something like a 1050 Ti and a brand new G4560 or AMD Ryzen 3. But today's PC will give you similar performance. In fact, the GPU, the GTX 670 that we're using, scored almost identical to a 1050 Ti when they were both overclocked versus overclocked. So impressive performance out of today's graphics card. And speaking of that, it did come in at $65 US. Now I picked this up in Japan when I was used parts hunting in Tokyo. We also managed to get a hard disk drive from Western Digital, 500 gigabytes, plenty fine for today's build, $15. And then for the case, we're going with the Nova TG, new case from BitFenix, and it's got tempered glass. This comes in at $59 and we'll talk about that separately later in the video, but for the memory we had to add 4 gigabytes on, and that was an additional 20 US to the build because we got the motherboard and 4 gigabytes of memory in a bang up case that we picked up in a used junk parts store in Japan. And then of course the power supply, I'm using a $10 heck. This thing is perfectly fine for today's build, and you can usually tell what a decent power supply will look like because it will have a strong 12 volt line compared to the 5 and 3.3 volt lines. Usually, doesn't always work like that, but general indicator, this power supply will be okay. Until of course it blows up. So for the CPU, we're going with the i5-750. This is usually a $35 CPU on AliExpress. 4 cores, 4 threads, actually performs quite well. In Cinebench, it scores around 400 and something points when you overclock it. Underclocked though, or stock clocks, it doesn't perform too well. So you will want to overclock this CPU. And in fact, if you want to buy this CPU, I highly recommend going with the Xeon variant for the same money. $35 on AliExpress, X3450. This has 4 cores and it also has hyperthreading, so 8 threads for the same money, not to mention it'll probably overclock better. Though for the cooler, we're going with an $8 LGA 775 Sith or Scythe, depending on how you say it. I'm a bit of a Star Wars fan, so I like to call it a Sith, the Lord of a cooler. $8, this thing performs extremely well because it's an LGA 775 cooler, though the motherboard, we got lucky today in that the motherboard that we're using has support, even though it's an LGA 1156 motherboard, it has support for a LGA 775 cooler. So awesome build, totaling in at $242 US, or if you're in Australia, 305 Australian dollars. However, for this money, you may be wondering how this thing performs. So let's take a look at the performance figures. PuBG, very popular game. In fact, I believe it hit more concurrent players than Counter-Strike CSGO did. So this game is no joke. A lot of people want to play it. This rig here performed on medium settings at 1080p, 40 to 50 frames per second. Then when I dropped it to low settings, which a lot of pros do play on this resolution, 50 to 70 FPS. So the frames were really smooth, especially on a budget where you're gonna get a 60 Hertz monitor. This thing was performing perfect for PuBG. Overwatch, high settings, 120 FPS pretty much constantly. Great to see that also in this game, the GPU and the CPU were being utilized pretty much near at 100% on both, which means there's a perfect balance of graphical settings for the CPU and the GPU to handle at the same time. Though of course, every time you do a PC build, there's always that person in the comment sections like, yo, Brian, where the GTA 5 benchmarks at, yo, dog? And so we've got it here, guys. GTA 5, 100 FPS on normal settings. So it was hovering around those settings, of course, going higher and lower depending on the scene in the game. And then we had that game that everybody wants to play, Avengers Lego. Marvel Avengers Lego. We were scoring 150 FPS at 1080p. I didn't even know how to play this game. The controls were all messed up. Though if you are a console gamer, you'll probably fit right in with this game. I believe it was designed for consoles, then it was a lousy port to PC. Then for the last game, we had Mortal Kombat X. Looks pretty cool actually. I got into the story a little bit. I couldn't play for the life of me, but the FPS was locked at 60 FPS and it was a smooth experience with all the graphics settings maxed out at 1080p. So this computer quite simply had the grunt to perform what was necessary of it. I was quite impressed with the performance, though. What about the overclocking on this thing, which is a very important factor. Usually with a lot of the used PCs I do, overclocking is crucial. So on this PC, the i5-750 initially, it comes out at 2.66 gigahertz on all cores. Now we managed to overclock this to 3.7 gigahertz. I did get it to 3.8 and even booted in at 3.9. However, at 3.8 after around about 5 minutes, it would just quickly throttle or quickly switch off, which is indicative of something throttling and something not having the requirements to run at this frequency. So I dropped it down to 3.7 gigahertz, where it was able to be idle stable for at least 10 minutes, which is crucial for me, especially if I want to jump into benchmarking and gaming since I don't have a whole lot of time. But this thing at 3.7 gigahertz was performing quite well. Now for the GTX 670, the graphics card, out of the box, this thing is quite aggressively clocked. It's the Galaxy version, and this happened before Galaxy went bankrupt or something, and then they rebranded as Galax. So this is actually a really cool looking graphics card, and it performs really well too. Scoring in at around 60 degrees Celsius when it was overclocked with the fans set to 75%. Now on this graphics card, you can only max the fans to 75%, which is kind of cool and interesting, but not cool at the same time, though the overclocks were impressive, scoring well over 1350 megahertz, which for the Kepler series of graphics cards is an impressive overclock. They're putting this build together, or if you guys want to put together a used PC, I recommend testing out all the parts beforehand. In this case, I had the motherboard, RAM, and CPU all in there at the same time with that power supply, booted up, and it booted up fine on the first go. I was kind of lucky. Sometimes you will have problems with used parts, and diagnosing can be a pain in the ass. That's always the risk that's going to exist versus new parts, where even if you have a faulty new part, you can just send it back for warranty, especially if you buy all the parts from the same store. However, in this case, everything was smooth sailing, and the case, the Nova TG, let's talk about that a little bit. It came in at 59 USD recommended retail pricing. Now, when I was at Computex, they said it was going to be 49 USD, though they didn't give me 100% confirmation. They did advertise at $10 cheaper at Computex. So I am a little bit disappointed to see it coming in $10 more expensive. However, at $59, it is a really nice case cosmetically. And also building in this thing was very easy. Cable management was quite smooth. There was enough drive bays, I believe 3 for both the hard disk drives, 3.5 inch, and 3 for SSDs. There was also 2 optical drive bays included, which I'm kind of not a fan of. I haven't used an optical disk drive for years now, so I'd like to see the existence of those drive bays terminated from this case in the future. Also, another improvement with this case, I believe they could mesh the top of the case to let the air out. Simply as it stands, this case, one big problem with it is it kind of acts as a sarcophagus for your parts. Now, the total power consumption of this build, which is kind of a mid-range PC, so if you've got a GTX 670 and a 4-core Ryzen or something and you overclock both those cards, then you should be pulling in around similar numbers in power consumption. This PC was scoring 350 watts, and quite simply the temperatures were at least a good 10 degrees higher with the tempered glass side panel on as opposed to off. Now, one good benefit about this case is it does have 2 included fans, so it will do a decent job of cooling, especially if you're going with a G4560 and a 1050 Ti or RX 560, then having the side panel on is going to do fine. There's not going to be much of a difference. But if you're going for those mid-range parts and you're coupling it with this case for the cosmetics, which are really good in my opinion, then you will suffer with the temperatures. So I'd like to see that improved in the future. And as I said before, I believe the easiest way to improve that is just to put a meshed top on the case to let the air vent out of the top of the case. However, besides that, there's nothing really that I could fault about this case. Includes USB 3.0, is a solid option, it looks nice, and that dark shade on the tempered glass does look very slick indeed. So I am liking the Nova TG, though there are a few little things I'd like to see improved in the next reiteration if they were to do that. Anyway guys, hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, then be sure to hit that like button and let me know in the comment section below what you think about this case right here and also the build. Love reading your comments as always. I actually haven't given this thing a name yet, so you guys can brand it whatever name, and the most upvotes will be the name of this new PC. And also don't forget to check out our forums, techcity.tv/forums, if you want to join a new home where we just constantly discuss random things, both tech and non-tech. And I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.